The workshop is still there, under the ash. 2,000 years and the stone walls held. The furnaces are sealed with gray pumice. The iron rack, still standing, still loaded with blades nobody ever delivered. At the back of the room, wrapped in burlap and quench cloth, is a Gladius that nobody commissioned. Nobody paid for it. Nobody's name was on the order. The ash preserved it better than anything else in Campania. To understand why that blade exists, and why it may be the finest piece of work from Pompeii's last summer, you need to go back to the man who made it. His name was Turrus. He was Gallic. He was owned. And he was, by every measure that mattered to Rome, one of the best iron workers in the region. This is the story of what he built, and what the building cost him. Turrus had been at the Gladius workshop for 11 years. He'd arrived with hands already calloused from his father's forge in Gaul, already knowing how iron breathes when it heats. He'd been sold upward twice before Flavius Gladius put him in charge of the production floor. He woke before dawn, every morning, not because he was ordered to, but because the furnaces needed 4 hours to reach the right heat. Pushing them faster meant uneven temperatures, which meant uneven steel, which meant blades that would eventually fail. His reputation was the only thing the system couldn't take from him, or so he believed. The process began with the bloom iron. Campania used ore hauled from Elba, gray, porous, heavy with slag. The first step was always the same: layering the bloom in the furnace with charcoal, heating it past red-orange into the yellow-white range, then hammering out the impurities. Too light and the slag stayed in. Too hard and you broke the grain structure of the iron itself.
How do you know when it's right? You barely even look at it.
That was Dorix. Younger, Gallic like Turrus, still carrying his anger close to the surface. He'd been at the workshop 3 years and could already heat and shape iron, but he didn't yet know how to read it.
Uneven. What's the color? Even heat, even color. You're not looking with your E by E.
Turrus taught Dorix the way his own father had taught him, not with explanations, but with repetition and silence. The iron speaks. You learn to listen, or you learn nothing. The bloom iron spent hours in the furnace before Turrus touched it again. While the furnace ran, he was grading the next batch of ore, setting aside pieces for cutting edges versus spine iron. A Gladius that was uniform throughout had a fatal compromise. Hard enough to hold an edge, it was too brittle at the core. Soft enough to flex, and it would fold under impact. The Roman solution was pattern welding. Alternating layers of higher and lower carbon iron, folded and hammered together until the grain structure locked. The hard iron held the edge. The softer iron absorbed the shock. But only if you did it right, every single time.
Every time?
Every time. A tool with unbonded layers will separate along that line under pressure.
Turrus did not say, and if that man doesn't come home because of a blade we made, the fault is ours. He'd learned not to speak that truth aloud, but he built it into every piece he touched, that stubborn, silent refusal to make something that would fail. The quenching was where most smiths cut corners, plunging the blade straight into water at bright orange. It hardened fast, but it built stresses into the steel that could cause fractures days later. Turrus let the iron cool in the air first, down from orange to red, red to dark cherry, and only then into an oil bath he'd mixed himself. The controlled cool gave the steel's crystalline structure time to settle before it locked. After the quench came the temper. You reheated the quenched blade to a lower temperature, watching the oxide colors shift from pale yellow to straw to brown to purple to blue, and pulled it at exactly the right color for the blade's purpose. A combat Gladius came off at brown to purple. Blue meant you'd gone too far, lost hardness. Yellow meant the blade would be brittle. Turrus could read those colors the way some men read faces. That afternoon, Aulus Gladius arrived. He was 26. His father had developed a shaking sickness, which meant Aulus was increasingly the one dealing with contracts. He walked through the space the way his father never had, quickly, reading the blades on the rack with a merchant's eye rather than a craftsman's.
Officer comes in 12 days. He wants a full batch, 30 blades. I told him 30 blades. I hear you, master. 30 blades by the solstice to us. 3 a day.
30 blades in 12 days was the edge of possible. The current pace was 2 blades a day, sometimes 3 if the iron graded well. 3 every single day, no setbacks, no material failures.
Work longer hours. I'll assign 2 more men to the bellows. You manage the timing. 30 blades, 12 a days.
He left before Turus could answer. Dorix had watched the exchange from the bellows corner. He waited until Aulus's sandals had clicked out of earshot.
You're going to say yes. You always say yes.
Turus set the blade he was holding back in the oil bath. He checked the edge geometry with his thumb, a habit so old it was automatic, the slight drag that told him the bevel was right. He didn't answer Dorix. To the north, visible from the workshop's rooftop, Vesuvius sat on the horizon with its usual silence. It had been trembling for days, small quakes, nothing unusual for Campania. The wells had run low. A few fountains had dried up. Nobody was particularly worried. The earth shook sometimes. That was simply how things were. Turus didn't know it yet. But he had 12 days left. The blade cooling in the oil bath behind him would be the most important thing he would ever make. He didn't know that either. The first week went as Turus had planned it. He reorganized the production sequence, staged the bloom iron in 3 batches so the furnaces were never idle, and pushed to 3 blades a day without reducing his standards. The folding still took as long as it needed to take. The temper colors still came off at brown to purple. Dorix worked the bellows and shaped the spines and never once said you were right. What Turus had not accounted for was the 5th day. The morning delivery brought bloom iron that graded poorly, heavy slag veins, dense gray inclusions that would remain as weak points if you didn't work them out. Working them out took time. He spent 3 hours on a single piece, reheating and hammering twice more than usual, and still discarded 2 of the 5 bars as unsalvageable. They were down to 6 blades with 6 days remaining. They needed 15 more.
Six blades? 6? Turus, we have a procurement contract with the Roman military. Do you understand what that means?
The iron was bad. I won't put bad iron.
Aulus took a bar of the rejected iron, one Turus had set aside as waste, and put it in the furnace himself. He didn't heat it as long. He hammered it once, folded it twice instead of 3 times, didn't check the layers for bonding. He shaped it quickly and plunged it straight from bright orange into the water trough. No air cooling, no oil bath. Turus watched and said nothing. Aulus pulled the blade from the water. It hadn't cracked, this time. He ran his hand along the flat and handed it to Turus.
The folding is incomplete. There are still slag inclusions in the core. Under impact, this blade will...
A soldier in the field isn't going to know the difference. The geometry is adequate, but the ring suggests a lack of sufficient folding.
He left.
It is what I
Turus
expected.
stood holding the blade.
It will serve its purpose. Make the remaining 9 that way. We hit 30,
Dorix came
we
to
keep
stand
the
beside
contract,
him.
and next season we
The
use
young
those
man's hands were
sparks.
balled at his sides.
So now we know what 30 blades costs.
Turus didn't answer. He set the blade down on the rack alongside the ones he'd made himself. From the outside, they looked the same. Anyone who didn't know how to read iron wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Nobody ever checked. That night, over the shared wall that separated the Gladius
Now we know
workshop
what
from the
30 blades
glassworks
cost.
next door, Surus appeared. He was 50-something, Syrian, with the kind of quietness that comes from a long time ago. He'd been at the glassworks for over 20 years. He and Turrus sometimes spoke over the wall during the evening cool. In the half-Latin, half-Gallic shorthand they developed across a decade of proximity.
You look like a man who's just discovered something he should have discovered 10 years ago.
He's filling the order with bad iron.
Of course he is. And the buyer will take them.
You don't know that.
Turrus. I've been blowing glass for this city since you were learning Latin. The buyers never know. They check the count and the length and they go home. I stopped caring about the glass 20 years ago. I'm still here.
The procurement officer from Misenum arrived on the 10th day. He was a compact man with the face of someone permanently behind on sleep. He walked down the rack of 30 blades, touching none of them, just eyeing the lengths and the shapes. And then he counted them. That was all. He ran no edge test. He didn't check the temper colors. He didn't tap the spine to listen for the ring that told you the crystalline structure was sound.
The ledger is accounted for. The shipment passes inspection.
He turned to Aulus and discussed payment. Turrus stood at the back of the room and watched. 7 years. 7 years of reading iron the way other men read faces, of discarding slag-heavy bloom that any other smith would have worked through, of tempering to brown to purple, even when the day was short and the furnace was running hot, and it would have been so easy to pull the blade at yellow and call it done. 7 years of that stubborn, silent refusal to make something that would fail.
This is the record.
And standing there watching a procurement officer count blades by length alone, Turrus understood. His excellence had been, in the strictest sense, optional. The system did not require it. What the system required was 30 items of the correct dimensions delivered on time. Everything else, all of it, had been his own private war. A war he'd been fighting alone in a room where no one else knew there was a war happening. Dorix was watching him from the bellows corner. The young man's expression held something Turrus hadn't seen there before. Not anger, something worse. Recognition.
What do we do now?
You understand now?
He had spent 7 years being the best, and it had changed absolutely nothing.
What do we do now?
The procurement officer loaded his 30 blades and left.
What do we do now?
Aulus paid the delivery
7 years
bonus.
of being the best.
Flavius Callidius heard the news from his
Changed
chair and
absolutely
nodded with
nothing.
mild satisfaction.
30 blades, 30
The
blades,
workshop
30
had met its
blades.
contract.
15 confirmed.
Business continued.
16.
Turrus went back to
30.
work.
Sign here,
3 days
Gladius.
after the batch shipped, he was alone in the workshop after dark. Dorix had been given an evening rest. The furnaces were banked low, not cold, not producing, just holding heat. Turrus had been sitting at the grinding bench for an hour without grinding anything. Cirrus appeared at the wall.
You're still here.
Where else would I be?
What are you going to do?
Turrus looked at the quench bath in the corner. The blade he'd started 3 weeks ago, the one interrupted by the rush order, left cooling in the oil, was still there. He hadn't touched it since. He got up
Quiet in
and
you
fished it
tonight.
out. It was a good
Quiet
blank.
in you tonight.
The bloom iron had grated exceptionally well. Tight
else would I
grain,
be?
almost no slag.
What are you gonna
The
do?
kind of material that came along a
Where
few
else
times
would
a
I be?
year. 3 folds, properly bonded, the rough shape already right. He lit the small charcoal brazier he used for handwork and began. There was no order for this blade, no buyer waiting, no count to meet, no Aulus watching the clock. He was simply finishing a piece of iron that deserved to be finished. He ground the bevels slowly, checking the angle by feel every few passes, the way his father had taught him in a village in Gaul that no longer existed. He checked the edge geometry with his thumb, that old automatic habit, and this time it wasn't habit. It was intention. He was making the blade he wanted to make, not the blade the contract required. Around midnight, Cirrus came back to the wall. He watched for a while without speaking.
Who is that for?
No one.
On the northern skyline, the faint orange glow that had been visible for 3 nights was brighter tonight. The trembling in the earth had grown from something you felt in your feet to something you heard as a low groan in the stone walls. The water in the quench bath trembled without being touched.
Who is that?
The mountain's been doing that all night. The glassworks lost a whole rack of cooling pieces this afternoon. The shaking cracked them.
Turras kept working. The tempering was the last step. He brought the blade's temperature up slowly with the brazier, watching the colors move across the surface. Pale yellow, straw, the faint bronze edge of brown appearing.
The mountain again.
He held it there, steady hands, steady
Been doing
light,
this all week.
and watched until the color was exactly where he wanted it. Then he wrapped the finished blade in oiled burlap and set it on the back bench. No rack, no order tag, no owner's name, just a blade, alone in the dark. The first major tremor came just before dawn. The workshop walls shuddered. Iron implements fell from hooks. A crack ran through the plaster above the north furnace, and through it, a low, continuous roar became audible, building from the direction of the mountain, growing louder as Turras stood still and listened. He stepped outside. The sky above Vesuvius was wrong. A column of dark material was rising, dense, churning, lit from inside by something orange, climbing so fast you could watch it grow. The sound was like nothing he'd heard before. Not thunder, not an earthquake, something older and heavier than either, felt in the chest before the ears registered it. The street was already filling with people, shouting in Latin and Oscan and languages Turras didn't know, running south toward the harbor. A woman clutching a wooden box, two men carrying an old person between them, a horse loose and panicked, crashing through a market stall. Turras went back inside. He didn't know why. He stood in the workshop. The furnaces, the bellows, the iron rack, the grinding bench where he'd spent 11 years. The blade on the back bench, wrapped in its oiled burlap, still warm from the tempering.
I built this place.
Not the walls, not the furnaces. Gladius built those. But the knowledge inside them, the specific understanding of how this iron from this regional ore behaved at each stage of the process, that knowledge was Turras. That would always have been Turras. He walked out. He didn't look back. We know what happened next to Pompeii. The column collapsed. The pyroclastic flow moved faster than any person could run. The city was buried under meters of volcanic material within hours. The Gladius workshop was excavated in the 20th century. Archaeologists found the twin furnaces, the iron rack still loaded. The quality of the blades varies dramatically. Some made with care still visible in the edge geometry 2 millennia later. Others are clearly rushed, the grain structure poor, the tempering inconsistent. At the back of the room, in a corner sealed off from the worst of the ashfall by a collapsed ceiling beam, they found one blade wrapped in mineralized burlap. No order tag, no owner's mark, no documentation of any kind. It was, by every metallurgical measure the archaeologists applied, the finest blade in the collection. The edge geometry was precise, the folding complete. The crystalline structure showed exactly the kind of controlled, slow quench that produces maximum durability. Nobody knows who made it. The records mention Flavius Gladius, the workshop owner. They mention Aulus, who escaped the eruption and later ran a smaller operation in Herculaneum. They don't mention Turras. They never do. But the blade is there. 2,000 years later, in a museum in Naples, preserved better than the names of its makers. The iron still holds the edge he gave it. You can't own that. You can't bury it deep enough. The work of unfree hands is still work. The stone remembers. The iron remembers. And the mountain kept its silence for another 2,000 years.